A perfect thatched roof crowns a medieval cottage after 25 winters. How did fragile straw outlast decades of rain, wind, and frost? By the end of this, you will understand the precise, forgotten engineering that made this possible. We will uncover the secret layers that defied water and the hidden maintenance rituals performed on the rooftops. What forgotten crafts from the past still hold surprising secrets for us today? The secret begins not on the roof but in the field. That golden thatch was never just any straw. Medieval roofers were selective botanists, choosing long-stemmed wheat or rye over the shorter, weaker stems of barley or oats. They needed a specific architecture. Think of a single stalk of wheat not as fodder, but as a miniature, hollow tube designed by nature to channel rainwater away from the grain. This hollow stem, called a culm, is the fundamental building block. Its length, its strength, and its natural waxy coating are what make a roof possible. Harvesting this material was a race against time, dictated by the sun and the moon of the agricultural calendar. The ideal moment was not when the grain was fully ripe for bread, but slightly earlier, when the stems had reached their maximum height and strength but still retained a crucial flexibility. If cut too late, the stems became brittle and would shatter under the thatcher's mallet. If cut too early, they were too soft, lacking the durability to last. This precise timing ensured each straw was a perfect, resilient reed. The process itself was meticulous. Scythes would sweep through the field, gathering the wheat in sheaves. But here, the grain was almost a secondary concern. The precious stems were then carefully dried, not in a barn loft, but often in open air, allowing the stalks to cure and harden without rotting. In regions near rivers and marshes, an even more superior material was often employed. Water reed, with its denser, straighter stems and incredible natural resistance to decay, could last for over half a century. Its use speaks to a deep local knowledge, an understanding that the best material was not always the most obvious one, but the one the landscape provided. This was not haphazard gathering. It was the first critical step in an engineering process, selecting the perfect natural fiber for a job that had to defy the elements for a generation. But a perfect bundle of straw is useless without an equally perfect frame to hold it. This brings us to the silent skeleton beneath every medieval roof, a structure of immense strength and thoughtful design. The foundation was everything. These were not the simple triangular trusses we might think of today. They were often crafted from massive, seasoned oak trees that had grown for a century to provide beams that could last for 3. One common design was the cruck frame, where two great curved timbers were joined at the top like giant hands in prayer, creating a natural, arching support. Another was the crown post, a central pillar rising from a massive beam to support the ridge, like a tree holding up the sky of the house. The critical feature they all shared was a steep, unforgiving pitch. A thatched roof cannot be shallow. That dramatic slope, often as sharp as 50 or 60 degrees, was not for aesthetics. It was a hydraulic necessity. Rain and snow had to be persuaded to flee the surface as quickly as possible. On a gentle slope, water would linger, seep, and find a way in. On this steep medieval pitch, it was a rapid, constant cascade, giving moisture no time to penetrate the thatch layers. Before a single straw was laid, the carpenters and thatchers prepared the rafters. Across these sturdy timbers, they would securely fix a lattice of flexible rods, typically split hazel or willow. These are known as sways or sometimes liggers. Think of them as the roof's basketwork, a sturdy, springy grid. This lattice served a dual purpose. First, it gave the thatcher something to securely bind his material to, a net to catch and hold the roof. Second, and just as importantly, its open structure allowed for vital air circulation underneath the thatch, preventing the damp, stagnant conditions that would lead to rot. So the stage was now set, a frame of oak steeply angled, dressed in a weave of hazel. It was a structure built to endure, designed to partner with the thatch, not just carry it. With that sturdy frame prepared, the real artistry could begin. The thatcher would start at the very bottom edge of the roof, the eaves, and work steadily upwards. He did not work with loose straw, but with prepared bundles known as yelms, or sometimes bottles. Each yelm was a neat, compact sheaf, roughly the thickness of a man's leg, its stems all aligned in the same direction. The thatcher would take one of these bundles and with a practiced motion, shake it out and slap it firmly against the hazel lattice. This crucial action, called dressing, made the stems fan out slightly at the bottom, creating a thick, even layer. He would then secure it not with nails or twine, but with a spar. A spar is a length of split hazel or willow, sharpened at both ends and twisted into a supple, durable staple. Using a mallet, he would drive these spars right through the yelm and into the wooden batten beneath, pinning the thatch in place. In some regions, they used long wooden pegs, and in others, large needles made from animal bone to stitch the layers together. Each new layer of yelms was laid so that it overlapped the one below, like the scales of a fish or the feathers on a bird. This overlapping is the genius of the system. As the thatcher worked his way up the roof, each successive course was set slightly higher on the steep slope, ensuring that any water running down would be caught by the overlap and directed out and away, never inward. The thatcher would constantly use a tool called a legget, a flat wooden paddle, to beat and neaten the surface, compressing the straw into a dense, interlocking mat. This compression was vital. A loose roof would let in wind and rain, but a densely packed one became a solid, cohesive shell. The final layer at the very top, the ridge, required the most skill and the best material, often a special weave of longer straw or reed, shaped and secured to form a waterproof capstone. This was not merely stacking straw, it was a form of textile engineering, weaving a waterproof garment for the entire house, one locked bundle at a time. This dense, interlocked mat was the roof's true armor. The final step after laying each yelm was a relentless, rhythmic beating. The thatcher would take his legget, that flat wooden paddle, or sometimes a heavy mallet, and strike the surface again and again. This was not just tidying up, it was a deliberate act of compression, a physical persuasion of the material. With every blow, he was driving the stems tighter together, eliminating the tiny air pockets and gaps that naturally existed between the straws. Think of it like felting wool. You start with loose, fluffy fibers full of space, but through pressure and friction, you mat them into a solid, dense fabric that repels water. The thatcher was doing the same to his roof, transforming a layer of individual straws into a single, unified shell. The goal was to achieve a density so tight that water hitting the surface would encounter no easy path inward. Instead, it would be forced to slide across the outer waxy coating of the compressed stems, a phenomenon called surface tension. The steep slope of the roof was the perfect partner to this compressed shell. That dramatic angle, often between 45 and 50 degrees, was a precise calculation. It was the minimum pitch needed to defeat gravity's sneakier tricks. On a shallow roof, rainwater loses momentum. It slows down, pools in microscopic dips, and eventually, through capillary action, gets sucked into the smallest gaps between the straws. But on a steep medieval roof, water never gets a chance to hesitate. It hits the dense thatch and immediately begins a rapid, uninterrupted descent. The pitch turns a gentle soak into a swift evacuation. Every raindrop becomes a tiny sled, shooting down the slope and flying off the eaves before it can even think about seeping in. This combination, the compressed density and the calculated steepness, created a perfect storm of runoff. The thatch shed water like a duck's back, not because it was impermeable, but because it gave water no reason and no time to stop. It was a masterpiece of passive engineering, using form and force to outsmart the weather for decades. Yet this cascading water presented its own new danger. Where should all that torrent go? The answer lies in a simple but profound architectural gesture, the generous overhang of the eaves. Look at any surviving medieval cottage and you will see the roof does not end neatly at the wall. It projects outward, sometimes by 2 or even 3 feet, creating a sheltered porch of air. This extension was the roof's first and most critical line of defense. Its primary job was to catch the waterfall. As rain raced down that steep, compressed slope, it would gather speed. If the roof ended directly above the wall, that concentrated stream would pour directly down the side of the building, saturating the timber frame, eroding the daub and wattle, and soaking the very foundation. Moisture rising up from a wet foundation is the single greatest threat to any building, medieval or modern. The overhang solved this with elegant efficiency. It threw the water clear, creating a visible drip line in the dirt or onto a stone, paving well away from the vulnerable wall. But the eaves fought a subtler enemy too: splashback. Even on level ground, a heavy raindrop hitting the earth can bounce back up with surprising force. This splashback carries particles of soil and moisture directly upward. Without an overhang, this dirty water would constantly pepper the lower portion of the wall and the very base of the thatch itself, keeping it perpetually damp and inviting rot. By projecting out so far, the eaves placed the wall in a permanent rain shadow. The falling water landed far enough away that its rebound could not reach the structure. In essence, the roof taught the rain to jump and then made sure it landed in a safe zone. This protection extended to the thatch's own most vulnerable point, its cut ends at the eaves. By ensuring this edge was always in dry air, never subjected to constant dampness from wall runoff or ground splash, the thatcher guaranteed the roof would age evenly from the top down, not rot prematurely from the bottom up. That sweeping overhang was not merely decorative, it was a calculated hydrological maneuver, a way of managing an entire weather system at the scale of a single home. Even the most perfectly thatched slope, however, has an inherent weakness, a single line where its defenses are most tested. This is the ridge, the high crown where 2 steeply pitched planes meet. It is the roof's spine, its highest point, and consequently its most exposed battleground. Here, the wind finds a direct target trying to pry and lift. Rain, driven sideways by storms, assaults it from multiple angles. Snow settles along its length, holding moisture against the thatch. If the eaves managed runoff, the ridge had to endure direct siege. Because of this, it could not be finished with the same material or technique as the main roof. Ordinary wheat straw, while excellent for the broad slopes, was too brittle and short to handle the sharp angles and complex shaping required here. For the ridge, the thatcher turned to a specialist. Often, this was sedge grass, a plant found growing in wet meadows and along riverbanks. Sedge has a unique triangular stem, incredibly flexible and long-lasting even when wet. Its natural oils and supple nature made it the perfect candidate for the roof's most demanding job. The thatcher would gather this sedge and begin a process more akin to basket weaving or rope making than roofing. He would take thick, damp bundles and twist them into long, continuous ropes of green material. Sometimes he would even braid multiple strands together for extra strength. These living ropes were then carefully molded over the sharp peak of the roof. One common method was to create a series of these thick, twisted rolls, laying them along the ridge line and then pegging them down securely with long, sharpened wooden pegs or more of those versatile hazel spars. Another technique involved weaving the sedge into a wide, flat mat that was then draped over the ridge and stitched into place. The key was to create a seamless, flexible cap that covered the raw, cut ends of the main thatch beneath. This cap had to be both waterproof and elastic. It needed to shed water cleanly over both sides, but also to flex and settle with the natural movement of the roof timbers below as they expanded and contracted with the seasons. A rigid ridge would crack, a loose one would blow away. The thatcher's skill was in creating a crown that was both armor and a living part of the structure. He would often shape the very top into a gentle, rounded curve, a form that offered no sharp edge for the wind to catch, encouraging rain to flow smoothly down its sides. The finished ridge, often a darker, richer brown than the golden straw below, was the signature of a master. It was the final, critical seal, the piece that locked the entire defensive system into place. Without this strong, flexible crown, the brilliant work on the slopes below would be undone within a few harsh seasons. The ridge was proof that a medieval thatcher thought in 3 dimensions, understanding that a roof was not just a surface, but a complex geometric form that needed a specialized solution at every joint and corner. A roof this complex demanded a watchful eye, not a blind faith. The idea that a medieval family simply built their home and forgot about the roof for 25 years is a comforting fantasy, but it is far from the truth. The reality was a partnership, a quiet covenant between the household and a craftsman whose work was never truly finished. The thatcher was not just a builder, he was the roof's lifelong physician. And his most important house call came every single year with the turning of the seasons. The timing was precise and practical. The annual inspection almost always happened in the late summer or early autumn after the harvest was in. This period offered a crucial window of dry, stable weather, perfect for working aloft. More importantly, it came just before the harsh trials of winter, the season of driving rain, heavy snow, and howling winds. This was preventive medicine at its most logical. You would not wait for a fever to break before seeking a doctor. You would fortify your health before the cold set in. So, as the days grew shorter, the thatcher would return. He would not simply glance up from the ground. He would climb a ladder, often a stout wooden one pegged securely to the eaves, and step onto the roof itself. His feet, clad in soft shoes to avoid damaging the surface, would walk the steep slopes with a careful, practiced balance. This was not a casual stroll. It was a methodical diagnostic survey. His trained eyes scanned for specific, subtle signs of distress. He looked for any graying or blackening of the straw, a telltale hint of moisture retention or the beginnings of rot, often starting near the ridge or under overhanging tree branches. He searched for thin patches where the dense mat had been worn down by wind or persistent weather, spots where the golden hue had faded to a brittle pale yellow. He checked for animal damage, the small scrapes and tunnels of birds or rodents seeking nesting material or shelter, which could open tiny gateways for water. His hands, knowing the roof's texture as well as his own, would gently probe for any sections that felt soft or loose, where the binding spars might have worked free or the underlying hazel lattice had weakened. Every rustle of loose straw, every slight dip in the profile was a note in his mental ledger. This annual pilgrimage was as much about listening and feeling as it was about seeing. A solid roof should feel like a firm, unyielding shell underfoot. Any sponginess, any crunch of degraded material was a problem to be catalogued and addressed. The thatcher's goal was to catch these issues not when they were gaping holes, but when they were mere whispers of future failure. A handful of new straw and a few fresh spars today could prevent the need for an entire re-roofing in 5 years. This ritual transformed maintenance from a costly, reactive emergency into a manageable, expected part of the household's rhythm and economy. It was a profound understanding that a building, especially one clad in a living material, was not a static monument, but a dynamic entity that thrived on consistent, knowledgeable care. This annual inspection was a diagnosis, and every diagnosis sometimes requires a surgical procedure. The true test of a thatcher's skill was not just in laying a perfect new roof, but in performing a perfect repair. A family could not afford to re-thatch their entire home every time a small storm damaged a corner or a patch of straw began to soften. The solution was a delicate, localized operation, an art form in its own right. The thatcher would first identify the precise boundaries of the problem area, often marking it with a few spare spars. His goal was to remove only the compromised thatch, leaving the healthy, interlocked material around it completely undisturbed. With a tool called a thatcher's knife, a long, hooked blade, he would begin the careful dissection. He would slide the knife under the binding spars of the damaged section and gently lift them, unhooking them from the hazel lattice beneath. This required a sensitive touch, as pulling too hard could disturb the tightly woven straw around it. Once the spars were free, he could peel back the bad yelms like lifting a corner of a heavy rug. Underneath, he would assess the state of the wooden sways. If they were sound, the repair could proceed. If rot had reached the lattice, that too would need to be carefully spliced with new hazel, a repair within a repair. With the area cleared, he would take fresh, prepared yelms, ideally from the same batch and type of straw as the original roof, or at least a very close match. He would dress and slap them into place, replicating the exact angle and density of the surrounding thatch. The real artistry came in the blending. The new straw had to be woven into the old, its cut ends tucked under the existing, healthy layer at the top of the repair. Using his legat, he would beat and compress the new material until its surface profile was indistinguishable from the roof around it. Finally, he would secure it with new hazel spars, driven in at the same angle and with the same spacing as the originals. From the ground, a well-executed patch was virtually invisible, a seamless integration of new and old. This ability to perform spot repairs extended the life of a roof enormously. It meant a 25-year roof wasn't a single, monolithic object that failed all at once. It was a living tapestry that could be renewed thread by thread, year by year, its strength maintained through countless small, intelligent interventions. This philosophy of repair respected the resource, the labor, and the household's economy, fixing only what was broken and preserving everything that still worked. But even the most vigilant thatcher and the most diligent homeowner faced adversaries that did not wait for an annual inspection. The roof was not just a shelter, it was an ecosystem, and its warm, dense layers were an irresistible invitation. Birds sought nesting material, pulling loose straws to line their nests. Mice and rats, those eternal companions of human grain stores, saw the thick thatch as a vast, insulated apartment complex, perfect for raising families away from the cats below. Insects, particularly the dreaded woodworm and deathwatch beetle, could find their way from the thatch into the timber frame beneath. A roof could be structurally perfect yet be slowly hollowed out from within by these silent, tiny tenants. This was a battle fought not with poisons, which were crude and dangerous, but with clever, integrated strategy. The first line of defense was architectural. Remember those hazel spars used to pin the thatch? Their sharp, twisted ends protruding slightly could make the outer surface a prickly, uncomfortable place for birds to land and peck. More deliberately, thatchers in some regions would weave a base layer of thorny branches, like blackthorn or hawthorn, right into the eaves. This created a natural barbed wire barrier, a spiky foundation that discouraged rodents from even beginning to climb up into the softer thatch above. It was a simple, elegant solution using materials the hedgerow provided. But the most sophisticated pest controllers were not built into the roof, they were invited to live around it. A wise household actively encouraged predators. They might install a simple wooden owl box high in the barn gable, offering a safe home for a barn owl or a tawny owl. A single owl family could patrol the fields and rooftops each night, silently eliminating dozens of mice and rats. Similarly, a niche left under the eaves might attract kestrels, those small, hovering falcons that feast on voles and large insects. This was natural pest control at its most effective, turning a potential threat into a guardian. The community understood that by supporting these raptors, they were protecting their harvest, their stored grain, and the very integrity of their roofs. For insects, the solution often came from the earth. Lime wash, a mixture of slaked lime and water, was more than just a white paint for cottage walls. Applied as a slurry to the lower sections of the thatch, especially around the eaves, it created a mildly caustic alkaline barrier. This was unpleasant or even lethal to many crawling insects and acted as a deterrent, preventing them from migrating from the ground up into the roof. It also had the added benefit of being mildly antifungal. The battle against vermin was constant, but it was met with a layered, thoughtful response, blending physical barriers, biological allies, and natural chemistry. It was a recognition that the home existed within a wider web of life, and that true durability meant managing that entire relationship, not just nailing down the shingles. Yet for all its resilience against rain and vermin, the thatched roof lived under one constant, terrifying shadow. Fire was the nightmare of every medieval village, a swift and total destroyer. In a world lit by candle, oil lamp, and open hearth, the risk was not just a possibility, it was a daily companion, and a roof made of dry straw would seem, to our modern eyes, like an invitation to catastrophe. But this perception misses the nuanced, practical reality of how these communities managed an ever-present danger. Their approach was not one of naive acceptance, but of layered communal defense. The first and most critical line of protection was not applied to the roof at all, but was built into the very heart of the home. Village laws and customs were fiercely strict about the placement and construction of the fireplace. The central open hearth on a floor of packed earth or stone was common, but it was always positioned with deliberate care directly beneath the highest point of the roof, the apex of the cruck frame. This location allowed the thickest, hottest smoke to rise and collect in the roof space, where it would slowly seep out through the thatch itself. That constant, smoky saturation is now understood by historians to have had an unintended benefit. The creosote and other chemicals in wood smoke act as a natural fire retardant, coating the inner straw with a layer of tarry residue that made it less likely to ignite from a stray spark. More importantly, communities began to mandate the construction of chimneys. These were not the brick stacks we imagine, but often wooden structures lined with clay or plaster, known as a hearth hood or a smoke bay. Their purpose was to funnel the dangerous sparks and embers upward in a controlled channel, away from the flammable roof timbers and thatch. Building a proper chimney became a matter of law, not just convenience. A household could be fined for having an unsafe hearth, a recognition that one person's carelessness could doom an entire street. Beyond architecture, there is intriguing evidence that some thatchers actively treated their material to resist flame. Historical records and experimental archaeology point to the use of fire-retardant slurries. One common method involved soaking the bundles of straw, the yilms, in a thick mixture of clay and water before they were laid. Once dried on the roof, this clay coating would encase the individual straws in a fine, mineral shell, making them much harder to ignite. Another, more expensive treatment used alum, a mineral salt. Alum-soaked straw would have had its combustion point raised significantly. The debate among historians is not whether these techniques existed, but how widespread they were. Alum was a valuable commodity used in leather tanning and dyeing, so its use on a commoner's cottage roof might have been rare. The clay slurry, however, was free and readily available, making it a plausible, localized practice. The truth likely lies in a patchwork of regional knowledge. A thatcher working in a densely packed village where houses leaned together like conspirators might have employed every trick he knew. In a more isolated farmstead, the primary defense remained distance, a wide yard separating the house from the barn and bakehouse. The greatest protection ultimately was culture. It was the communal understanding of fire's speed, the strict rituals of banking the hearth at night, the watchful eyes of neighbors, and the swift, practiced response of a bucket chain from the village well. The thatched roof was not a tinderbox waiting for a spark. It was the focal point of an entire society's careful, calculated relationship with a fundamental danger. Its survival for 25 years is a testament not to luck, but to a profound and constant vigilance woven into daily life. Perhaps the most surprising ally in preserving the thatch came not from the thatcher's hands but from the family's daily life. Inside the cottage, the central hearth was never truly cold. From autumn through spring, a fire smoldered for warmth, for cooking, for light. That constant, gentle fire produced something far more valuable than just heat. It produced a steady, rising plume of wood smoke. This smoke did not simply vanish up a chimney. In many homes it had no direct chimney to escape through. Instead, it filled the upper space of the room, the dark area beneath the steep pitch of the roof known as the smoke loft. Here it would linger and slowly, over years and decades, seep its way up through the dense mat of straw above. This was not a design flaw, it was an inevitable process, and it had a profound, accidental effect. Wood smoke is not just vapor, it carries with it a complex cocktail of chemical compounds. Among the most significant is creosote, a dark, oily tar. As the smoke filtered through the thatch, this creosote condensed on the individual straws, coating them in a thin, sticky, protective layer. Think of it like a natural varnish, applied not with a brush but with the slow breath of the home itself, one meal, one winter evening at a time. This coating served a dual purpose. First, it was a powerful fungicide. The resins and acids in the creosote created an environment that was hostile to the molds and fungi that cause rot. The very thing that made the inner roof beams black and sooty was actively preventing the straw from breaking down. Second, it acted as an insect repellent. Many pests, including wood-boring beetles and their larvae, find the taste and smell of these tarry compounds unpalatable or even toxic. The smoke-saturated thatch became an unappealing home, steering bugs away from the roof's vital timber structure beneath. This process transformed the thatch from a purely organic material into something more hybrid, a straw preserved in a natural resin. It helps explain a curious observation from archaeologists studying medieval building remains. They often find that the oldest, most degraded thatch is not at the bottom, where ground moisture might attack, but sometimes in the middle layers. The very top was weathered by sun and rain, but the interior, smoke-infused core could remain astonishingly intact. This was not a planned preservation technique. No thatcher's manual would instruct you to smoke your roof. It was a fortunate byproduct, a hidden interaction between domestic life and building science. The family, simply by living and warming their home, were participating in the slow, steady maintenance of their own shelter. The smoke that blackened the rafters and stung their eyes on a windless day was also quietly, imperceptibly extending the life of the roof over their heads, weaving an invisible shield against time and decay with every log they burned. A roof's longevity was never just about the craftsmanship, it was a negotiation with the very sky above it. The climate of a region dictated the terms of this negotiation, demanding different strategies from the thatcher's toolkit. A cottage on the dry, windswept plains of East Anglia lived a completely different life from one nestled in the rain-drenched valleys of Wales or the misty hills of the West Country. The thatcher was not a roofer with a single, rigid method. He was a local environmental scientist, reading the landscape and adapting his entire approach to its unique personality. In the East, the dominant enemy was not rain but wind. Constant buffeting winds from the North Sea could shred a loosely bound roof, teasing out individual straws and slowly thinning the protective layer. Here, the thatcher's response was density and weight. He would select the heaviest, sturdiest wheat straw available, and he would beat it with his legget until it was as tight as a drum skin. The pitch of the roof might be slightly less steep than in the West, not because water runoff was less important, but to present a lower, more streamlined profile to the gales. A steep roof acts like a sail, catching the wind and risking being torn from its frame. A moderately pitched, densely packed roof offered less resistance, allowing the wind to flow over it with less destructive force. The binding spars would be driven in at closer intervals, and the ridges were often tied down with a network of straw ropes staked to the ground, like a ship's rigging securing it against a storm. The goal was to make the roof a solid, immovable object hunkered down against the endless push of the air. Conversely, in the wet western regions, the thatcher's entire focus shifted to managing a deluge. Here, the roof pitch became dramatically steep, sometimes reaching 60 degrees or more. This was a hydraulic imperative. The steeper the slope, the faster rainwater fled its surface. Lingering moisture was the killer, so every design choice encouraged rapid escape. The material of choice often shifted from wheat straw to water reed. Reed, with its hollow, unbranched stems and natural waxy coating, was superior at shedding water. Its stems are straighter and align more neatly, creating smoother channels for water to flow down without catching or pooling. A thatcher in Devon or Cornwall might also use much thicker layers of thatch, building a deeper, more absorbent buffer that could take on a heavy downpour. While the outer surface shed the water, the immense thickness beneath acted like a sponge, holding moisture away from the inner roof timbers and allowing it to evaporate slowly during drier periods. The eaves in these wet regions were often extended even further, creating deep porches to throw the cascading water far from the sodden ground and protect the walls from relentless splashback. In areas prone to heavy snow like the Pennines or the Scottish borders, the pitch was again steep, but the thatch was layered with a specific technique to bear the weight. Snow settles on a shallow roof, its moisture seeping in as it melts slowly from the bottom up. On a steep roof, snow is more likely to slide off in great sheets before it can melt and penetrate. The thatcher's compression here was key, creating a surface so slick and dense that snow could not easily grip it. Microclimates within regions further refined these choices. A farmhouse in a sheltered river valley where mists lingered might need different detailing than one on an exposed hilltop. The thatcher's genius lay in this hyper-local adaptation. He did not impose a universal solution. He listened to the whispers of the local weather, the available materials, and the lay of the land, crafting a roof that was not just on the landscape but of it. This deep symbiosis between place and practice meant a roof was perfectly tuned to its specific environment, a custom-fit shield that could confidently face its own unique set of challenges for a quarter of a century. The thatcher's knowledge was far too valuable to be left to chance or individual memory. To ensure a roof lasted 25 years, medieval society created a powerful institution to protect the craft itself, the Thatchers Guild. These were not mere social clubs, they were the rigorous guardians of quality, the living libraries of technique, and the enforcers of a standard that protected entire communities. A poorly thatched roof was not just an eyesore, it was a civic hazard, a fire risk that could leap to a neighbor's home, or a leaky shelter that would collapse and ruin a family's livelihood. The Guild existed to prevent such disasters at their source. It controlled who could practice the trade within a town or region, setting strict rules for apprenticeship, masterpiece creation, and pricing. But its most profound role was as the sole channel through which the craft's deepest secrets flowed from one generation to the next. A young boy, often the son or nephew of a master thatcher, would enter into a formal apprenticeship that could last 7 years or more. This was not a modern classroom education. It was an immersive, physical, and oral tradition. He began with the most humble tasks, perhaps gathering and sorting straw or twisting hazel spars until his hands were raw and his fingers knew the exact tension required. For years, he would be the master's shadow, fetching tools, preparing materials, and observing every motion, every judgment call made high on the roof. The secrets were not written down in manuals. They were passed on the ladder in the yard over a meal. The master would explain why this batch of rye from the north field was superior to that from the south, how to judge the flexibility of a hazel rod by the sound it made when bent, or the precise angle to drive a spar so it gripped but did not split the underlying batten. Knots for tying off ridges, stitches for invisible repairs, recipes for clay slurries, all were committed to memory through relentless repetition. The apprentice learned to read the weather in the color of the sky at dawn, to feel rot in a rafter by the dull thud of a mallet strike and to hear the whisper of a loose yelm in the wind. This slow, meticulous transfer was about building not just skill but judgment. The guild's final test was the masterpiece, a section of roofing done entirely by the apprentice's hand, judged by the guild masters for its density, its line, its durability. Only upon approval could he become a journeyman, and later, after further work and scrutiny, a master himself, entitled to take on his own apprentices and add his own hard-won insights to the oral tradition. This system created a powerful consistency. A homeowner hiring a guild-certified thatcher knew they were getting a craftsman trained in the accumulated wisdom of centuries, a man who understood that his work was a covenant with the future, a promise of shelter that had to outlast his own lifetime. The 25-year roof was not a happy accident. It was the guaranteed output of a society that had institutionalized excellence, wrapping its most vulnerable structures in layers of protected knowledge as dense and interlocked as the thatch itself. The Masters Guild protected the knowledge, but the household had to supply the coin. A roof that would last a generation was never a cheap endeavor. It represented one of the most significant financial investments a medieval family would ever make, a careful calculus where quality was weighed directly against long-term survival. The expense began with the raw material itself. Remember, this was not scrap straw left over from the harvest. The long-stemmed wheat, or even more costly, the superior water reed, was a specialized crop. A farmer dedicating a portion of his best riverside land to grow reeds for roofing was sacrificing space that could have grown food. That reed had a high market value. Then came the skilled labor. Hiring a master thatcher, a man backed by the guild's reputation, commanded a premium wage. He did not work alone. His journeymen and apprentices all required payment, food, and lodging for the duration of the project, which could span weeks or even months for a large farmhouse. The specialized materials added more lines to the bill. The hazel or willow for the lattice and the thousands of hand-split spars had to be coppiced, prepared, and transported. If a fire-retardant clay slurry or the rare alum treatment was used, that was another cost. When you add it all up, the price of a fully thatched roof could be staggering, equivalent to several years of a skilled laborer's income. For a peasant family, this often meant years of saving, perhaps selling surplus livestock or setting aside a portion of each harvest's profit in a literal clay pot. It was an investment that required planning and sacrifice, so why commit such vast resources to straw and reed? Because the alternative was far more expensive in the long run. A poorly thatched roof made with inferior materials by an unskilled hand might need replacing in 5 or 10 years. Each re-roofing meant the entire cycle of expense would begin again, draining the family's wealth at a much faster rate. A leaky roof also brought hidden costs. Dampness rotting the precious timber frame led to catastrophic structural repairs. Mildew ruined stored grain, the family's food security for the winter. Illness from a cold, wet home meant lost work and medical expenses. The 25-year lifespan was not just a boast of craftsmanship, it was a bedrock of household economics. Spending a large sum once for a roof you could trust for a quarter century was the most prudent financial decision available. It transformed the roof from a recurring burden into a settled asset, a known quantity that allowed the family to plan for the future, to invest in other things, knowing their primary shelter was secure. This economic reality forged a powerful bond of trust between the thatcher and the household. His reputation was his bond, and the family's hefty payment was an act of faith in that bond. They were not buying a product, they were purchasing decades of peace of mind, a guarantee of dry nights and safe winters, making the golden roof overhead not merely a shelter, but the family's single most important financial instrument. But how did these principles translate to the grandest roofs in the landscape? Consider the sprawling timber frame of a medieval manor house, its great hall crowned by a roof not of simple slopes, but a complex geography of valleys, dormers, and chimneys. Here, the thatcher faced his ultimate test of skill and foresight. A simple cottage roof is a single, sweeping plane designed for swift runoff. A manor roof is a miniature mountain range with intersections and crevices where water is not encouraged to flee, but is instead funneled and concentrated. The valleys where two roof planes meet at an inward angle are the most dangerous. They act as natural gutters, collecting every drop from a vast area and channeling it in a torrent down a single, vulnerable seam. Left to traditional thatch alone, this constant, focused deluge would quickly erode the material, leading to a guaranteed leak. The solution was a hybrid technology, a marriage of organic and mineral. At these critical junctions, the thatcher would collaborate with a plumber, a craftsman who worked with lead. Sheets of this malleable, impervious metal were carefully shaped and laid into the valley before the thatching began. The lead formed a durable, waterproof trough hidden beneath the overlapping layers of straw or reed. The thatch was then dressed right up to its edges, creating a seamless transition where water would flow safely over the metal, protected from ever touching the vulnerable thatch in the valley's core. Similarly, where a chimney stack, a solid stone or brick island, punched through the sea of thatch, the interface was a perpetual danger zone. The rigid chimney and the flexible roof moved differently with heat and moisture, creating gaps. Here, the thatcher would employ stepped lead flashings, pieces of metal shaped like stairs that were wedged into the mortar courses of the chimney and layered over the thatch. This created an overlapping, flexible seal that could accommodate movement without breaking the waterproof barrier. Dormer windows, those charming projections that bring light into the attic, presented another puzzle. Each dormer created two new valleys at its sides and a horizontal junction where its own small roof met the main slope. Each of these lines was a potential failure point, each requiring meticulous detailing with lead soakers, small individual pieces of lead tucked under the dormer's slates or tiles and woven into the thatch. The ridge on such a vast structure also demanded reinforcement. Instead of a single, twisted sedge roll, the main ridge of a great hall might be a substantial timber beam, carefully shaped and then clad in lead, over which the decorative thatched ridge capping was finally applied. This hidden armor provided a storm-proof backbone. The thatching itself on such a scale became a feat of logistics and consistency. The work had to be perfectly coordinated so that the roof shed water as a unified system, with teams of thatchers working different sections simultaneously to ensure uniform density and pitch. The immense weight of the thatch, now multiplied across such a broad area, required an even more robust timber frame beneath, often with additional supporting trusses. Every principle from the cottage was amplified and adapted. The annual inspection became a major event requiring scaffolding. Repairs were more costly and complex, but even more critical, as a single leak over the Lord's high table or the stored manor records was unacceptable. The manor roof stood as the apex of the craft, proving that the humble art of thatching could be scaled to protect the most ambitious structures of the age, not through brute force, but through intelligent, layered solutions that guided water on a precise, predetermined journey from the highest ridge to the safe ground far below. The Grand Manor's hidden lead gutters and complex scaffolding were a world away from the single-room dwelling of a common family. For the peasant, the thatched roof was not an architectural statement, but a matter of sheer survival, and every decision was filtered through the harsh lens of scarcity. The timber frame was not mighty oak, but whatever straight, seasoned wood could be spared from the hedgerow or the coppice, perhaps ash or elm. The pitch of the roof was still steep, out of absolute necessity, but the footprint was small, a single, simple gable sheltering the entire household, its animals often sharing the warmth at one end. Here, the thatcher's true genius for adaptation shone brightest because the prescribed, ideal materials were often out of reach. A peasant family could rarely afford to set aside their best wheat straw for roofing, nor could they purchase expensive water reed from distant marshes. Instead, they turned to what their immediate landscape offered for free: On the windswept moors of Scotland and northern England, where trees were scarce and the soil thin, the thatcher's material came not from cultivated fields but from the wild, open ground. Heather, that tough, woody shrub that paints the hills purple, became a roofing staple. Its stems are short and brittle, a challenge to work with, but when bundled tightly and laid in thick, deep layers, it forms a dense, springy mat that is surprisingly weather-resistant. Heather thatch is also rich in natural tannins, which help repel insects and slow decay. In other areas, bracken fern, often considered a nuisance plant, was harvested in late summer after it had dried on the stalk. Bundled and laid with the fronds overlapping like shingles, bracken created a slick, water-shedding surface, though it was less durable and required more frequent replacement. Even turf, squares of earth held together by a thick mat of grass roots, was used in the most impoverished regions, laid over a rough timber frame to create a living, sod roof. These materials were not second best by choice, but they were mastered by necessity. The thatcher working on a cottage had to understand the unique properties of each wild material, how to compensate for its weaknesses. Heather required a shallower pitch to prevent wind from getting underneath its springy bundles. Bracken needed to be laid with an even more exaggerated overlap to channel water quickly over its shorter fibers. The margin for error was vanishingly small. A family could not survive a major roof failure. There were no savings for an emergency repair, no spare room to move into while the work was done. This pressure made the annual maintenance ritual not a wise precaution, but a non-negotiable act of family defense. Every autumn, the father or a knowledgeable neighbor would climb onto that roof with a profound sense of urgency. His inspection was brutally focused. He would feel for any softness that might indicate the heather was rotting from within, a process that could start quickly in a damp valley. He would look for thin spots worn by constant wind, or for signs that birds had pulled at the bracken for nesting material. Repairs were immediate and done with whatever was at hand. A worn patch might be stuffed with fresh moss gathered from the stone wall, then covered with a few precious bundles of saved straw and pinned with homemade willow pegs. The goal was identical to that of the manor, 25 years of shelter, but the path to get there was one of relentless vigilance and ingenious hyper-local improvisation. The peasant's roof was a testament to a different kind of wealth, not of coin, but of deep, intimate knowledge of every plant, every slope, and every weather pattern on their few acres of land. Its longevity was a quiet, hard-won victory, proof that even with the most meager resources, human ingenuity could weave a lasting shield from the very weeds underfoot. This long partnership between home and roof leaves behind subtle whispers for us to find. Centuries later, when a medieval cottage finally collapses or is dismantled, the thatched roof itself is almost always gone, returned to the earth that grew it. But archaeology has learned to read the echoes it left behind, uncovering physical proof of its construction in the most unexpected places. One of the most common pieces of evidence is not the thatch, but its shadow. When excavating the site of a long-vanished timber-framed house, archaeologists often find broken pieces of daub, the clay and straw plaster that filled the walls. On the inner face of some of these fragments, pressed into the soft clay before it dried, are the clear, parallel lines of straw or reed stems. These are roof impressions. They were created in a moment of repair or disaster, when a section of rotting thatch from the eaves fell inward onto the wet daub of the wall below, leaving a perfect negative mold of its structure. Studying these impressions tells us the exact diameter of the stems used, whether it was fine wheat straw or the thicker water reed, and even the angle at which the yilms were laid. It is a fossil of a vanished roof captured in a single, accidental moment. More direct evidence comes from the small, durable components of the roof itself. In the soil of medieval home sites, excavators frequently uncover the thatcher's spars, those twisted hazel staples. even after 500 years in the ground, their sharpened points and distinctive twisted form are instantly recognizable. Finding them in large concentrations around the perimeter of a building confirms the stories of extensive eaves, as these are the spars that worked loose and fell over the decades. Similarly, wooden pegs, often made of oak, are found. These are the larger pins used to secure roof timbers or heavy ridge components, their surfaces still showing the tool marks from the thatcher's axe or draw knife. Each recovered spar and peg is a tiny, solid testament to the specific materials chosen, the coppiced woodland managed to produce them, and the hands that shaped them. On very rare, miraculous occasions, the thatch itself survives. This happens only in exceptional conditions where the normal processes of decay are halted. The most famous examples come from waterlogged environments, like the foundations of buildings preserved in peat bogs or deep, anaerobic river mud. In these oxygen-free tombs, organic material can be preserved for centuries. Archaeologists have retrieved actual sections of medieval thatch from such sites. Examining these fragile, brown clumps is like opening a time capsule. We can see the precise layering of the eaves, measure the exact thickness of the roof, which often surprises us with its depth, sometimes over 2 feet thick. We can observe how the stems are aligned and how the base layer of hazel sways was woven. Laboratory analysis can even identify the species of plant used and sometimes detect the chemical signature of wood smoke preservatives or the clay from a fire retardant slurry. These rare fragments move us beyond theory and into tangible fact. They confirm the meticulous compression, the intelligent overlapping, and the sheer mass of material that defined a roof built to last. They prove that the 25-year roof was not a legend or an optimistic estimate, but a measurable, achievable standard. Its blueprint now written not in parchment, but in the very straw and wood that brave families trusted with their lives. But these physical fragments are only part of the story. To hear the voices of the people who lived under these roofs, we must turn to the paper trails they left behind. Across England, tucked away in county archives, are thousands of medieval manorial court rolls, account books, and personal wills. These are not grand chronicles of kings and battles. They are the mundane, meticulous records of everyday life, and they provide stunningly direct evidence for the 25-year roof. The lord of the manor kept detailed financial accounts, recording every penny spent on maintaining his properties. Entries for thatching work appear with predictable regularity. We might see a payment in 1 year for the complete re-thatching of a barn, using a specified number of cartloads of reed purchased from a named merchant. Then, precisely 24 or 25 years later, another substantial entry appears for the same barn, for the same amount of material and labor. This cyclical pattern in the ledger books is a powerful testament to the expected lifespan, a financial forecast based on generations of observed performance. It shows that the 25-year figure was not an aspiration, but a practical budgeting reality for the wealthiest in society. For the common folk, the records are often more dramatic, captured in the manorial court rolls. These were local courts that settled disputes and enforced village bylaws. Here we find the frustrations and failures, the moments when the promise of a durable roof broke down. A tenant might be brought before the court for neglecting to maintain his roof, allowing it to become so thin and leaky that it endangered the lord's timber frame beneath, a serious offense. More telling are the cases brought by one neighbor against another. Imagine a man named John Ford bringing a complaint against his neighbor, Robert the Thatcher. John claims that just 7 years prior, he paid Robert a significant sum to re-thatch his cottage. Now the roof is leaking badly, the straw is rotten, and his family's stored grain is spoiling. He demands restitution or a proper repair. The court would summon witnesses, perhaps other thatchers, to examine the work. If they found the thatch was poorly laid, too thin, or used with inferior green straw, Robert would be found at fault and forced to make it right, often at his own expense. These disputes are crucial. they proved that a 25-year lifespan was the community standard, the benchmark against which all work was measured. A roof failing in 7 years was not just bad luck, it was professional malpractice, a breach of an understood contract. Finally, we have the intimate glimpses from wills and inventories. When a person died, officials would sometimes inventory their possessions and the condition of their property for inheritance purposes. These documents might note, for example, that a cottage had a roof of wheat straw, put on just 5 years prior and thus in good repair, a valuable asset for the heirs. Or more poignantly, they might describe a roof as old and worn, needing imminent replacement, a liability passed down to the next generation. These passing mentions in wills treat the roof's age as a matter of fact, a piece of standard information as ordinary as noting the number of cooking pots or the state of the plough. Together, these handwritten records from manor, court, and deathbed create a chorus of corroboration. They move us from the archaeology of materials to the archaeology of expectation. They show a society that not only knew how to build a roof to last a quarter century, but one that organized its laws, its economy, and its very sense of fairness around that dependable golden standard. The final winter of that 25-year covenant would arrive not with a sudden collapse, but with a slow, undeniable surrender. For all its genius, the thatch was a living membrane, and its lower edges, despite the protective eaves, had spent a quarter century in a constant cycle of wetting and drying. The very physics that preserved it now dictated its end. While the upper layers, smoked and hardened, might still be sound, the oldest straw at the very bottom, the first yelms laid against the hazel lattice, would finally succumb. They became soft, blackened, and free of blare, a spongy band of decay that could no longer hold back the weather. A few more patches could no longer save it. The time had come for the great replacement. This was a community event planned with the same care as the harvest. The master thatcher would return, this time with a full crew. Their first task was one of controlled demolition. Using their long, hooked knives and sharp-edged tools called shearing hooks, they would carefully strip the entire roof down to its bare wooden skeleton. They started at the ridge, cutting and peeling away the thick mat, working downwards in great, crackling sections. The sound was unmistakable, a rustling roar as decades of compressed straw were liberated. It was dirty, dusty work, the air thick with the scent of old smoke, damp earth, and decaying vegetation. As they reached the eaves, they would find the proof of the roof's faithful service. The bottom foot or so of material often reduced to a peat-like mulch, its structural integrity completely gone. The rafters and hazel sways, now exposed to daylight for the first time in a generation, would be meticulously inspected. Any timber showing rot was sisted with new wood, and the entire lattice was reinforced, preparing a fresh stage for another lifetime of shelter. But in the medieval world, nothing of such volume and organic value was simply waste. The mountain of old thatch piled in the yard was not a problem, it was a resource. This spent roofing material was black gold for the fields. Over 25 years, it had been enriched with a perfect mixture of decaying plant matter, wood ash from the hearth smoke that had filtered through it, and the droppings of nesting birds. It was, in essence, a pre-composted fertilizer, teeming with the nutrients that grain crops craved. The family would carefully cart it out to their strips in the common field and spread it thickly, plowing it back into the earth. The nitrogen and potassium it released would nourish the next season's wheat, some of which would, in turn, grow long enough to be harvested for the new roof. This was the ultimate closed loop. The straw that had sheltered the family and their harvest now fed the soil that would grow the straw to shelter their children. The roof did not just last 25 years, it invested itself into the next 25 years of the family's survival, its final act one of generative return. The cycle was complete, a slow, beautiful orbit of material from field to roof and back to field again, binding the house irrevocably to the land that sustained it. That ancient cycle of renewal connects directly to the rooftops you might see today. The craft of thatching never truly vanished, and a modern master standing atop a cottage in the English countryside is the direct heir to those medieval artisans. The silhouette of the roof, the steep pitch, the rhythmic sound of the mallet driving home a spar, these remain powerfully unchanged. The fundamental principles are timeless. A modern thatcher still selects long-stemmed water reed or wheat straw, still dresses yelms onto a hazel lattice, and still overlaps each course like scales to shed water. Many even prefer the same hand tools, the legget for beating and the shearing hook for trimming, finding that centuries of refinement have left little room for improvement. The core understanding that a roof is a dense, compressed shell designed for rapid runoff is the unbroken thread linking the 13th century to the 21st. Yet, step closer and you will see the subtle, decisive differences that define modern practice. The most visible change is in the binding. That medieval hazel spar, twisted by hand, is now often accompanied or even replaced by stainless steel hooks or screws. These metal fixings, driven by a cordless drill, offer a speed and a security against corrosion that natural materials cannot match. The twine used to stitch ridges and secure tricky details is no longer simple hemp, but a synthetic treated to resist ultraviolet light and decay for decades. Perhaps the most significant hidden upgrade is in the underlay. Beneath the beautiful reed, you will now find a breathable, waterproof membrane stretched over the rafters. This acts as a final, fail-safe barrier. Even if wind-driven rain were to penetrate the thatch, it hits this membrane and is channeled safely away, protecting the timber frame absolutely. This one innovation alone addresses the greatest historical vulnerability. So, with all these advantages, could a modern thatched roof, built with traditional methods but without the constant wood smoke of an open hearth, still last 25 years? The answer is a definitive yes, and often longer. The loss of that smoky preservative is more than compensated for by superior material science. Modern thatchers use reed that is often graded and selected to a higher standard, ensuring consistent length and durability. The synthetic underlay and fixings eliminate many causes of premature failure. Furthermore, the understanding of ventilation is now scientific. Carefully designed eaves details and ridge vents ensure a constant flow of air beneath the thatch, carrying away any residual moisture and preventing the stagnant damp that leads to rot, a problem medieval builders mitigated only through thickness and pitch. The annual inspection remains sacred, but it is now sometimes aided by moisture probes and thermal imaging cameras that can detect problems invisible to the naked eye. The modern roof is a hybrid, a perfect marriage of ancient form and intelligent new materials. It achieves the medieval goal of generational shelter, not through accident or smoky preservation, but through deliberate, enhanced design. It proves that the old masters were right about the shape, the substance, and the spirit of a roof, and that we have simply learned how to give their brilliant ideas a longer, more dependable lease on life. That image of a primitive, leaky hovel crowned with straw is a stubborn modern fiction. It is a prejudice born from seeing decay, not understanding design. We must judge a technology not by its humble materials, but by its performance against the challenges of its age. For a medieval family, the ultimate measure was not whether a roof was made of stone or straw, but whether it kept the rain out, the heat in, and the structure sound for a generation. By that definitive standard, a master-crafted thatch roof was not a second-rate substitute for tile or slate. It was often the superior, locally sourced solution. Consider the context. Slate required specific geology and expensive quarrying and transport, limiting it to regions near those resources. Fired clay tiles were heavy, required substantial timber framing to support their weight, and their production consumed vast amounts of firewood. Thatch, by contrast, was a renewable crop or a harvested wild plant, its materials grown and gathered within walking distance of the building site. Its production demanded solar energy and skilled labor, not fossil fuels or long supply chains. This was sustainability born of necessity, but it was also profound efficiency. The system's sophistication is hidden in its layered intelligence. A slate roof is a simple barrier, a hard shell that keeps water out by being impermeable. A thatch roof is a dynamic filter, a thick, organic membrane that manages water through a combination of physics and geometry. Its steep pitch and compressed surface exploited surface tension and gravity in a way that a shallow pitched tile roof could not. Its immense thickness provided insulation that slate or tile could never match, trapping the warmth from the central hearth during long, bitter winters. That cozy interior was a direct result of the roof's complex structure. While a tile roof might rattle in a gale, a densely packed thatch roof absorbed sound and wind force, its flexibility allowing it to sway slightly rather than crack under stress. The annual maintenance ritual, often seen as a weakness, was in fact a strength of the system. It represented a continuous, low-level investment in preservation, catching small failures before they became catastrophes. A tile roof, once installed, was largely ignored until a tile slipped or cracked, potentially leading to a sudden, serious leak. The thatch roof's need for care fostered an intimate relationship between the dweller and their shelter, a constant dialogue that ensured its longevity. The 25-year lifespan, documented in court rolls and account books, was a known quantity, a predictable economic fact. In many regions, it outperformed early, poorly fired tiles which could spoil and crack with frost in far less time. To label this as primitive is to mistake simplicity of material for simplicity of thought. The medieval thatcher was an engineer of natural materials. He understood hydrology, ventilation, tensile strength, and thermal dynamics. He adapted his designs to microclimates, choosing different grasses, different pitches, different thicknesses based on wind patterns and rainfall. This was not guesswork, it was applied science, refined through centuries of observation and guild-protected experimentation. That golden roof was not a stopgap, it was the pinnacle of a specific technological tradition, a testament to human ingenuity making the absolute most of what the land provided. It provided durable, warm, and effective shelter for millions of people across centuries, a legacy no primitive technology could ever claim. There is a quiet mystery woven into the very straw of those old roofs. While we understand the broad principles, the intimate, hands-on knowledge of a master thatcher was a living library, and with the decline of the craft, entire chapters may have quietly closed. Consider the sheer variety of local environments across medieval Europe. A thatcher in a foggy coastal village dealt with salt spray and relentless damp, while one in a sheltered inland valley faced summer heat and winter frost. It is not just likely, but almost certain that these craftsmen developed hyper-localized solutions, little tricks of the trade passed from father to apprentice that we have no written record of today. For instance, the specific plants used in treatments might have been common weeds in one parish and unknown in the next. We know some thatchers used clay slurries, but what if the best clay came from a particular bank of the local stream, mixed with ash from a specific type of wood burned in the hearth? Perhaps they added crushed limestone from a nearby outcrop to make the slurry more alkaline, enhancing its fire retardant and insect-repelling properties. The recipe would have been a closely guarded secret of that village thatching family, a formula that worked for their unique conditions. The knowledge of when to harvest certain materials might have been tied to lunar cycles or specific saints' days, a folk wisdom that connected the craft to a deeper rhythm of the natural world, now lost to time. Beyond treatments, the very patterns of weaving and laying could have held subtle genius. We talk about overlapping like scales, but what about the direction of the lay? In a valley notorious for strong westerly winds, did a thatcher learn to align the stems at a slight angle, training the thatch to shed water diagonally away from the windward side, preventing driven rain from being forced up under the layers? There might have been special knots for securing ridges in hurricane-prone areas, or unique methods for weaving sedge at dormer junctions that created a more flexible, watertight seal than any standard technique. These were not grand innovations, they were micro-adaptations born from watching a roof fail in a specific spot and devising a fix over generations. The loss of this granular knowledge came not from a single event, but from a slow tide of change. Industrialization brought cheap slate and mass-produced tile by canal and rail, undercutting the thatchers' economic footing. As young people moved to cities, the long, demanding apprenticeships found no takers. The guilds dissolved, and with them, the formal structure for passing on not just the major skills, but the countless minor ones. A master might take his best tricks to the grave simply because there was no eager apprentice at his side to receive them. This forgotten layer of the craft poses a tantalizing question for us today. When modern thatchers use traditional methods to restore a medieval cottage, are they recreating the roof exactly as it was, or are they, in some small way, creating a best guess? They use the right materials and the right overall shape, but could they be missing the final 5%, that last layer of localized optimization that turned a very good 25-year roof into an exceptional 30-year one? It is a humbling thought. The true masterpiece of medieval thatching may not have been just the roof you could see, but the deep, silent, and utterly specific conversation between the craftsman and his immediate patch of earth, a dialogue spoken in straw, clay, and wind that we can now only partially overhear. 25 years was not a random number plucked from the air. It was the precise cultural equation for survival, solved over generations. This lifespan represented the perfect equilibrium point where material science, human economics, and social structure all converged. Think of it as a contract written not on parchment, but in the very fibers of the roof itself. The materials, when expertly selected, prepared, and maintained, could physically endure for about a quarter century before the foundational layer at the eaves succumbed to inevitable decay. But the genius lies in how that physical limit aligned with everything else. Economically, 25 years transformed the roof from a recurring burden into a manageable investment. For a peasant family, saving for a re-roofing was a monumental task, one that required years of planning and sacrifice. A lifespan of 10 years would have been financially crippling, a constant drain that could never be escaped. 50 years might seem better, but it was often beyond the realistic durability of the organic materials, and it placed the cost beyond the horizon of a family's ability to plan. 25 years, however, was a span that matched the rhythm of a working life. A young couple might re-thatch their new home, and by the time the roof needed replacing, their children would be grown, able to contribute labor or resources to the task. It was a cycle that interlocked with human generational turnover. This time frame also cemented the thatcher's irreplaceable role in the community. If a roof lasted 50 or 100 years, the craft would have been a rare event, a specialty that might not support a dedicated master in a village. But a cycle of 25 years meant that in any modest-sized community, several roofs would be due for replacement every single year. This created steady, predictable work for the thatcher and his apprentices. It guaranteed the economic viability of the craft, ensuring the knowledge was not just preserved but constantly practiced and refined. The annual inspection ritual, those careful diagnostics on the rooftop, were the heartbeat of this system. They were the way the community paid a small, regular premium on their long-term shelter insurance, catching problems while they were cheap to fix. This maintenance cycle trained everyone from the homeowner to the journeyman in the language of the roof. It made the 25-year benchmark a shared expectation, a standard so ingrained it became the basis for lawsuits and inheritance valuations. Ultimately, this time frame created a beautiful, sustainable loop. The spent thatch after its service returned to the fields as fertilizer. The savings for the next roof grew alongside the children who would live under it. The thatcher's knowledge passed to a new apprentice just as the roofs he laid as a young man needed their first major repairs. 25 years was long enough to feel like permanence to a family, a guarantee of safety across the span of a childhood. Yet it was short enough to keep the craft and the profound local knowledge it embodied alive and essential. It was not merely a measure of endurance but the calculated pulse of a resilient society. That golden roof, enduring for a generation, was never a gift of chance. It stands as a definitive triumph of appropriate technology, where every element was perfectly matched to its purpose and place. The longevity was engineered through meticulous craftsmanship, from the selection of each hollow stem to the precise angle of every hazel spar, and it was sustained by a culture of proactive, vigilant maintenance, an annual ritual as predictable as the harvest. This was not primitive shelter, it was sophisticated, localized science. It reveals a medieval ingenuity we often underestimate, a deep, quiet intelligence that solved the problem of shelter not with imported materials, but with profound observation and adaptation. They looked at a field of rye and saw a waterproof membrane. They felt the prevailing wind and adjusted the pitch of a roof to meet it. They understood their landscape so intimately they could weave its very grasses into a shield against time. So the next time you see a historic cottage or a grand timbered hall, look beyond the quaint charm. See in its lines the calculations of hydrology, in its materials a closed loop of sustainability, and in its survival a testament to human care stretching across centuries. That roof has a story woven into its thatch, a 25-year promise kept by generations. What other ancient building secrets do you think are hidden in plain sight? Share your thoughts and questions in the comments below.